Hey everybody, welcome back to Final Resonance TV and episode number 16 of Van Halen Stories. Today my guest is Jim Gostad. It's not right? Gostad, right?
That is correct. That is correct. Well done.
Okay, Jim, for those of you who don't know, has a bunch of great videos on the Van Halen tones from each album, breaks the tones down, shows you the production techniques behind a lot of the extra things that I think that this is one of the things that you do really well with that, with the production part is, people don't realize part of the Brown sound is that compression and
Absolutely.
reverb after the fact. I mean, I guess you've heard those recordings where it's just the room mics, right?
Yes. Then that last video I did was that.
Yeah. So,
And by the way, if you hear my dog snoring, he's at my feet. It's not what I had for lunch coming back through. So
mine might come in too. Mine might come in too in a minute. Yeah. So hearing those room mics though is kind of like hearing what it was without that processing that you put on in these videos, and that's kind of an eye-opening thing to listen to anyway. But yeah, that's one of the things that you've done, and you've done this. You did a great thing that I need to watch again about the tremolo and how to make it stay in tune. Which, since I just put this together, I would want to figure out that trick.
you did a fabulous job on that one. I've just seen the pictures on Facebook. It looks fabulous. It looks perfect.
Thanks, man. It was fun. We did a good job. I think it turned out all right. So let me go back with you a little bit because I when you've been on like Tone Talk or one of these other shows, I don't know that we've really gone into your history much. Back in Wisconsin, you grew up or born in Wisconsin?
I was born in Madison, Wisconsin. Yeah.
Okay.
Don't hold that against me. So.
Yeah. And so you get into music how?
I am about 8, 9 years old. I'm sitting up with my brother, who's 2 years older than me. Before I should start. Before that, this is where our story kind of mirrors the Van Halen story.
Okay.
So, my older brother, 2 years older than me, I was always a Civil War fan when I was a kid. I liked the Union Army. I shouldn't be saying that to a guy who lives in Alabama, but I'm.
Yeah, I told you I'm from the north.
So there was this drum corps that my parents divorced. We had moved to La Crosse from Madison when I was really young. La Crosse is right on the Mississippi River. So I was with my mom. We were poor as hell and all that stuff. But so I joined this drum corps, the Cavalettes they were called, because I loved the uniforms and I wanted to be a drummer. So I brought my tom-tom home. They let me take it home to practice. And my brother took the tom-tom from me and he wouldn't give it back. And he was marching around the backyard playing the tom-tom. And again, similar story. I said, fine, you play the drum. I'm going to do something else.
Right.
So shortly thereafter, we're sitting up late at night and we're watching. It was either the Midnight Special, Burt Sugarman's Midnight Special, hosted by Wolfman Jack, or it was Don Kirshner's rock concert. I can't remember which one, but I saw Rory Gallagher. Rory Gallagher was on one of those shows, and he had his beat up Strat, and he played the hell out of it. It was such a cool performance. I said, I want to play guitar. I want to play electric guitar. That is the coolest thing I ever saw. So I nagged and begged and begged and nagged and begged my mom to get me a Stella Harmony acoustic guitar with the action was, like this on it. I think back then, so I'm 9 years old, and that was 1975, and I think she paid $75 on layaway for that guitar from Lightholds Music in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and I played that guitar for the next probably 2 years and never really had lessons. I took 6 months worth of lessons and learned, my open position chords and a couple of finger exercises and maybe briefly touched on learning how to read music. But a friend of mine had another guy a couple years older than me, family friend. He had an electric guitar. He had an old National Les Paul copy, one step up from a Hondo, maybe a Hondo 2 kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he showed me how to play bar chords. And from there, my dad made a deal with me and said, if you save $50 of your own money, I'll buy you an electric guitar. And so you know how hard it is for, like, at this time I'm 10,
Right,
11.
right.
You know how hard it is in the 70s for a kid to save $50 and it couldn't come from gifts. You had to go out and earn it.
Right.
So I finally saved up. He'd made the same deal with my brother for a drum set. So my brother John got a super cool swirl Slingerland kit for like $200, and I got this Hondo 2 Les Paul copy with DiMarzio's. Come on, it had DiMarzio's from the factory in it, and I got that for like $150 or something. So then I was on my way, and we found an old Yamaha solid state guitar amp at a pawn shop, and that was my first rig. I started playing in bands at that point. I had been playing long enough. I knew enough to fake my way through things, and the rest from there is just a continuation of that. It kept getting bigger, kept honing the craft, played in more, local bands. Cute story. My first professional gig was, I was 12 years old playing at, my mom booked it. Actually, it was at the YMCA in La Crosse, and it was a 24-hour lock-in. And a buddy of ours, another older friend who was playing in a local band, kind of took us under his wing. He's now the president of a record company here in Nashville, Triple Tigers Records.
That's wild.
So his name is Norbert Nix. So Norbert played in a band called Phoenix, and we looked up to Phoenix, and he loaned us the PA, a few power cans for lighting. He loaned me a Marshall 212 combo, 50-watt 212 combo, loaded with JBL D120s, I might add.
Yeah.
So anyway, long story short, we played that gig, had a blast, completely had the bug now at that point. And they stiffed us. It was $25 gig, and they stiffed us. The YMCA stiffed us. Either that or my mom, the manager, the promoter, ran off with the cash. One or the other, I don't know, but that's.
You got a good start in the music business then, right?
I
learn right away.
Trial by fire.
Right,
trial by fire.
How it goes.
So from there, I eventually moved back to Madison, and high school years, and I had been playing for a while. Obviously by this time had played in bands and had a fairly good reputation as a pretty decent player. And I worked in a bowling alley bar that my dad was a partner in. And one of the bartenders was good friends with a guy that played in a band that used to play at the Shuffle Inn all the time.
Okay.
The famous Shuffle Inn, Van Halen fame.
Yeah.
And he got me to sit in with this band, and I got to sit in for about, I don't know, half a set at the Shuffle when I was probably 13.
Okay.
And from there, just took off and snowballed and escalated and snowballed.
This is going to be about 1982.
Probably 80. Yeah, probably 80 or 81 actually, because I think I was a freshman 79, 80. So I'm thinking 81 probably.
Okay.
I had my SD Curly guitar at that point. Remember the SD Curlies?
I can't remember that one. What was that?
No, it was made by Randy Curly out of a U-Haul, like one of those U-Store U-Haul things. He set up a wood shop, and he was making these handmade guitars. Jack Blades had an SD Curly bass.
Okay.
There's only select places you could get them, and I had the SD Curly. It was a cool guitar.
Wow.
It burned up in a fire, but that's a whole nother story.
Right. Wow. So the Eddie Van Halen comes onto your radar at what point, and when do you first see Eddie Van Halen live?
All right. So 1978, the guy who showed me bar chords, the buddy of mine, the family friend, the brother from another mother guy, we're at his house for Thanksgiving, in November of 1978. And he says, he turned me on to Deep Purple and all that stuff. He was kind of my big, showed me the catalogs and all of these great bands. So he says, I got this new album. He pulls out the album. He says, "You got to hear this."
Right.
The first thing he puts on is Eruption.
Okay. He just keeps running with the devil. He just puts on Eruption.
He goes, "You got to hear this. You absolutely got to hear this." And he puts on Eruption. And back then, as you know, if you were reading about it, some of the reviewers or the critics or whatever were saying it's some sort of synthesized solo. It wasn't just guitar. There was something else in there that he was doing. And so we're going, what the hell was that? How does he do? What is that? So we did all that stuff. And then he played the rest of the album. And it was just like, holy crap. So I was hooked. So 1978, and then I had a chance. They were coming around a tour in 1979. It was their first world tour. And I saw them in Madison, Wisconsin. That was, I think it was $7.50 for that show.
That's amazing, right?
And I think it was Screams was the opening act. And my brother and I were right down front. It was the first time I ever saw a drop curtain.
Yeah.
I mean, they came out as they always, did, but you had never seen that before in 1979. So you could hear Eddie doing, wanking and everything backstage, the dive bombs, Michael Anthony doing the rhino calls, the woo and all that stuff. And Al's beating around the drum kit and the follow spots are all spinning through here, but you can't see the stage because it's behind a black curtain. Like came out, they started with Light Up the Sky, and so Ed and Mike are running back and forth across the stage. The drop curtain falls and they're running, sprinting back and forth. They're in Light Up the Sky. They're right in the middle of the song. Roth comes out, strutting out of nowhere because you're too busy looking at the other guys and the spectacle of all the lighting. And they get into the drum breakdown, and here's Ed runs up to the side of the stage, and Mike's on the side of the drum riser, and they're both beating on timbales that you couldn't see because the whole set was chrome and clear, and it was just massive drum kit. And Roth is standing on the kick drums, hitting cymbals, And I look at my brother and I go, holy shit, what, what is it? So, I mean, we were hooked. I mean, you'd never seen anything like that ever in your life. So we were hooked on the whole Van Halen thing from that point forward.
So I think that, I
was hooked on it.
You're making a point though that
I was hooked.
That you're making a good point though about the timing of this kind of showmanship. I mean, I guess I saw Foreigner in the late maybe 80, I think it was. Some of my first shows, they had sparse stages. They didn't have a lot of lighting. They didn't have a lot of. It was more about the playing and less about the show.
Well, I mean, like I saw my very first concert was Rush Brownsville Station in Max Webster.
Okay.
And that was 76, 75 or 76. It was the All the World's a Stage tour, essentially. The same stage rig, the same everything, same set list.
Right.
And that was super, super cool. And I thought, man, those guys are I became an instant Rush fan. So that's early on in my going to see band's career. Then I went on to see Styx, Aerosmith, Nazareth, everybody from that era I saw before I saw Van Halen. Ted Nugent.
Sure.
I saw them all in a relatively small auditorium, a 3,000 seat auditorium, because that's what we had in La Crosse. The famous Mary E. Sawyer Auditorium was an excellent concert venue because there wasn't a bad seat. It was a tiny room. So by the time I got to see Van Halen in 79 at the Dane County Coliseum, which is right across the street from the famous Sheraton Inn 7th floor, the Sheraton, it's right across John Nolan Drive from
the one they trashed the 7th floor, right? Yeah.
The one they trashed the 7th floor and appears on the second album, Special Thanks. So they always had a special affinity for Madison, I think. And that 78, that was on the 78 tour when they were opening in Madison, they were opening for Montrose, Journey and Montrose.
Right.
And I believe the story is that they were playing I think it was the Orpheum Theater on State Street in Madison, and there wasn't enough room for 3 bands on the stage.
Right.
So they kind of
that's what I
got
read.
kicked off, and then yeah,
That's how they end
and
up.
so
They end up at the Shuffle In.
yep,
Is they? I guess Susan. I was reading Susan's story, and apparently
yeah,
they tried to. They found out they were going to be around, so they. I guess they arranged it, or somebody arranged it for them to do that. And the Shuffle.
yeah. For some reason, Sue was working for a local music sheet and in Madison, and things were more organic back then. I think people talked to each other, and promoters, they knew the promoter. And so the promoter, I think, ended up calling Warner Brothers and tour support at Warner, and getting everything blessed. And then the promoter was looking for another venue, and a couple got suggested. There were two really good clubs at the time in Madison, but the Shuffle In is the one that landed it. And the Shuffle was the quintessential rock club. I mean, pool tables in the back. I think the fire capacity, I think, is somewhere around 550 or something like that. But they ended up moving the pool tables out. They took them somewhere. And I guess the place was packed, and there was well over 1,000 people in there that night.
Right. Right.
Now my phone's ringing.
But I heard that. I was reading that. I was just reading this about this gig, and apparently it was like a smaller room, and then they did have to put like 1,000 people in it, and Susan's role in it and all that. And then what was something I read? This is on when Eddie had passed. They'd done an article with her interview, and it was said that she suggested this to Noel Monk.
Really?
The Van Halen necklace, yeah.
I'll have to ask her about that.
That's what I read. I was like, now I had never heard that now, because I've been like trying to figure that out for a number of years as where that came from. I know that it hit the their sales. I think in '80 they put them out for fans.
Yeah, that's that.
But yeah, I'm trying to put together the whole story behind that, because they got them for this the first platinum album, awards thing, but they ended up paying for them, of course, out of their own, their own stuff. And then, and there's this whole story behind that piece of jewelry. And now this other piece that I just found today, I was like, whoa, no way. She's the one that suggested that.
Well, I know that Sue spent a lot of time with them, because they were, and they spent a lot of time in Madison. If you've ever seen from that second tour, a lot of tour photos, Michael Anthony's always wearing the Mad City t-shirt.
Okay.
That's Madison, Wisconsin. They had a lot of fun in Madison. They were there for 3 days. They were holed up in the Sheraton. And I think their next gig was in Chicago. And then they came back up to either Milwaukee or back to Madison and stayed again. And so Sue was going back and forth and running with them that whole time.
Okay.
So she got to spend a lot of time with them. So I wouldn't be surprised at all. And she's got a lot of really good Alex Van Halen stories, because she ended up hanging with Alex a lot.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'll have to get with her at some point. And she's got a new book out too on AC/DC. I saw that she's put out.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, she's I think I told you in an email or something. I've known Sue since I was probably 14, somewhere in that range, 15 years old. Yeah, just a wild things. She was living in Savannah for a while. She's back up in Madison again.
Okay.
She was in Savannah for about 4 or 5 years.
Let me ask you something about 79 again before we get off to 79. Now the lighting, you were talking about the lighting, and I just saw a video that popped up on the 79 tour. It's a really dark footage. How dark was the lighting in this? Was it?
It wasn't dark at all. You're just looking at a crappy Super 8 camera. It was the brightest concert I ever saw.
Okay.
They had the ACLs, the aircraft landing lights, all underneath the drum riser, and it lit up the entire room. And they had guys sitting in the follow chairs up above.
Sure. And
there were probably at least 8 follows in the building. So it was the light rig was the biggest light rig you ever saw in your life up to that point. Right. I mean, it was massive. You compare it to the Fair Warning tour, and it was nothing.
Right.
But, Fair Warning was a monster. And then you look at 84 and you go, okay, could you make it any bigger? They did. So
Well, I was going to ask you about that. So did you see 80?
I did not see 80. I couldn't raise the money to go see the show. I couldn't get to the show.
So you
I
saw
was too
81.
broke. I was a
You saw
broke.
81 though.
I saw 81 twice. I saw them in Madison and I saw them in Milwaukee about a month later.
So I'm my whole thing is my whole Instagram and everything is all about 1981 because I saw them on Don Kirshner's rock concert, and that's what
Yeah.
got me into music. All right, because I saw the Unchained video and I was like, this is. I did the thing where you go, I hit Eddie at a certain point and then I went all the way back to the first album. So that was what it was. It was that video, and I did. I kind of heard Eruption in the form of that outro of that song at the end where he's just shredding like crazy, right? At the end of it,
Right.
and so when I heard
Right.
Eruption, I heard the elements of what I heard in that, in the Unchained video. So I kind of wasn't as
Right.
shocked by it, I guess, as I would have been had I just had Eruption thrown in front of me. But
Right.
yeah, that video and that tour, talk about that whole show, that 81 show.
Well, to me, that was all right. So the 80, I missed 80, and I've seen the pictures of the stage set up for 80, and I just, I thought it was kind of ugly. It wasn't, the 79 tour was cooler looking. It was cleaner. It didn't have the little spaceshipy looking things coming off the drum riser. I didn't like the drum kit as much. The drum kit wasn't as cool.
Mm-hmm.
So then you come up 81. So again, the drop curtain and everything, so you couldn't see what was behind, you couldn't see the mountains, the white baffled speakers,
Mm-hmm.
and remember, we didn't have MTV. We didn't have videos. You didn't have, you'd have to pick up a Cream magazine and maybe see some live concert, some Hit Parader, one of those magazines.
They're probably old photos, so they're probably photos from the tour before. They're not the ones that you're about to see. Yeah,
exactly. So you didn't see the new tour stuff. So, the PA was noticeably bigger, stacked on either side of the stage. That was before they flew anything,
Mm-hmm.
So same thing. The lights go down and the everybody's wanking away backstage on their stuff, and the drums are, and you get the Rudy intro, when he's screaming into the microphone, the Mighty Van Halen,
Right.
And they come out and they just kill it. And I forget what they opened with.
On Fire, I think.
I forget.
It
might have been On Fire. I'd have to pull up the set list from that one.
Yeah.
I know that what is it? Van Halen.net or one of those things has all the
Mighty Van Halen. Mighty Van Halen.
There's actually the 1984 show is the bootleg from Madison is up there. The audio from that 1984 show is up there. But same thing, drop curtain. And it was like, you saw the mountains of the white baffled speakers and how they were stacked the way they were stacked. And the light rig and the 4-kick drum kit, that monstrous thing with the huge, the gong behind it and it's way up high. And I forget the backdrop that they had hanging behind them when they came out, because they kept switching the backdrop throughout the night.
Okay. So you think there's more than two? Was there more than two backdrops? Because I've always heard there were two, and that was it.
Well, they had the logo backdrop, then they had all the speaker stack backdrop, and then they had the Mean Street backdrop.
Okay.
So they had the dark street thing. So there were at least three that I can remember.
Yeah, there's one apparently where the city is decimated in the background.
And that could have been it too. That could have been there could have been four.
It's just very rare that you see any photos of it, though. There's almost no photos.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, it's true. But I think there were probably 8 follow chairs up in the rig.
Mm-hmm.
Probably 8. And that was funny. They would, it was all planned out, but there was a trick every night, every tour stop. And so they'd be playing Everybody Wants Some, and, Roth would go, hey, I'll give me some jungle drums, and then Al would start the pattern kind of thing for Everybody Wants Some. And and Roth would say, oh, give me some Jungle Lights, you know, let's,
Right,
oh, stock market just closed.
right.
So, and so nothing would happen, you know, and I can't remember if it was Madison or Milwaukee, but I think it was Madison that first time. He looks up at the guys in the follow spot chairs and he starts laughing and he points to Eddie and he goes like, and he looks up and they're all looking up there. The whole band's looking up in the rig and they're all laughing hysterically. And so we all look up and all the guys in the follow chairs are moving, got their asses hanging out, face down at the band, standing up out of their chairs. In Milwaukee, it was, you know, give me some Jungle Lights, doing the same shtick. And he says, give me some Jungle Lights. And the stage gets flooded with red. And it's like, oh man, that's fucking red, you know. And it's like,
Right.
in Madison, it was a prank. And I think they were doing that all over at every tour stop. So
That's cool.
they never knew what to expect. And that's one of the things that was so fresh about those shows. Yeah, a lot of it was rehearsed and Roth would use the same lines over and over and over. But I tell you, being able to see the band play 2 dates relatively close together, but with a break in between, they changed up the set a little bit and the show had a different feel to it. There was a different energy level. One was better than the other. The Madison show was better than the Milwaukee show for whatever reason. I don't know, but the crowd was more energized in Madison. I like to think that because of the Sheraton Inn and what they did to the Shuffle Inn dressing room and destroyed it. And the Shuffle Inn, by the way, had before it burned down, had the best dressing room in the Midwest because Van Halen had to pay for it, but they never did pay for it. They stiffed them. So the Shuffle rebuilt the dressing room because they destroyed it. And it was the greatest dressing room for all the regional and local acts that played there. So we always had to thank Van Halen for it, but it turns out that they never paid the bill. But anyway, I think they really enjoyed coming to Madison and it showed. I saw them there for 79, 81, 84, and then a couple of the Hagar shows, I think. I can't remember. I know I saw some Hagar shows in Illinois too. But
What did you think of '84? I mean, that was my first show. What did you think of it?
I thought it was impressive. I thought it was spectacular, but I thought it was not as good.
Right.
I thought it was, I mean, they were at the top of their game, I think, in 81.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what everybody thinks.
I think Fair Warning was, they were still young and hungry and they weren't maybe not as burned out, maybe not as glossed over from the fame and fortune. And I mean, that show was massive. It was just absolutely massive. And Roth had become more of a caricature by 84.
Right.
You know, don't get me wrong. I loved it. I mean, I absolutely loved it. Don't get me wrong. But
but if you're looking back through time and looking at Roth in the early days and looking at that band in the early days, they're this tougher, younger, you know, version of themselves.
Yeah. And in 79, you could see he was entertaining as hell in 79, right. But it was, you know, Ice Cream Man back then was a riot. I mean, it was just because you had never seen anything like that. He'd stand up there and, you know, screw around with his open E tuning and just making shit up and scatting this and God, it was entertaining and it was funny. And again, you hadn't seen anything like that.
Right.
And
over the years, you know, you go for 30 years with this band, and you kind of like, yeah, I've seen this one before, but you know what I mean. You're talking about when you first see something that's totally new. Yeah, I mean, people don't understand that how that was for people that had, like you said, never even seen a picture of what they're about to see.
Yeah, you know, I bet you could tell me what you thought of '84. That's the first time you saw him. You had seen photos, you'd seen video, so at this point, by the time 84 comes out, what's your impression?
Well, in 84, you know, it was one of the first few shows. It was in January of 84, into January. My impression was it was massive, you know, I mean, it's this massive rig, right? But I think that looking back at it, when I look at the Panama video, there's shots in it where I go, I swear that's at our show.
Yeah.
You know, that's the visual
Yep.
that I had from the concert. I thought they were
Right.
awesome, you know, and I of course loved that album. But when I looked at '81, I always thought '81 was the peak.
Yeah.
You know,
That was the one to see. And I didn't see Diver Down either.
I've heard good things
I
about
was
Diver Down though. I heard a lot of good people. People tell me a lot of good stories about him being pretty on with the melodies and pretty tight on that tour in '82.
yeah,
Now,
I never minded him doing that live. I always thought, let Roth be Roth. I mean,
right.
he was fun. It was entertainment.
Yeah,
I didn't go there to see the album. I went there to see the band do their thing.
yeah. That was a different thing back then. We didn't have all this. I hate to get into the American Idol thing, but there's this thing that's happened since those shows have come along where people have become very. Everybody wants to be technical and their assumption of, or you know what I mean. I don't know. It's just like
No, I think you're right, but I think if the right thing came along, I mean, I think if a Van Halen came along again in this or something like that, if they had never existed and came along in this time, they would do the same thing. They would have this, they would ascend the same way because let's face it, in the 70s, I mean, I love my disco. I love the old horn sections. I love that stuff. It's, the funk and disco is cool. The Ohio Players and those guys were awesome. I mean, just killer bands, Parliament Funk and all that stuff. That stuff is so cool, but it was also formulaic and beat heavy. And everybody did the dance routines, everybody had the horn section spinning the horns and doing this and doing that. And you had the Jacksons doing their scat stuff with their, and so that was pretty formulaic.
Four on the floor everywhere.
Yeah. And very well rehearsed and very, I keep coming back to formulaic, but play it note for note, recreate the record. And here comes Van Halen. And you go, holy shit, what is this? I mean, they were better live than they were on the record.
Right.
And that's not something that I don't think people strive for anymore. I think bands, everybody wants to play on the grid now. The record company forces you to play on the grid. Right. I mean, why even have a real drummer? You're losing all the groove, Like whenever I record here, whenever my brother comes down from Wisconsin and we work on something new, we don't play it at clicks. We play live in the room. I mean, pushing and pulling is that's part of what the feel of the music is. I mean, you don't want to be an idiot, off to the races, rush this, I mean, but like listen to John Bonham. I mean, there's so much. I think was it Rick Beato who did that great breakdown of Fool in the Rain, the drum part from Fool in the Rain, dan, 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 it's that great syncopation. He played it as it was, and then he quantized it and put it on the grid, and it lost all of its feel.
Sure.
I mean, yeah. And the same thing with auto-tune, the same thing with all this stuff, same thing with multi-tracking guitars. And the more times you play a guitar part into the I was going to date myself and say into the tape machine. The more times you do that, the less clarity, articulation, and the less it sounds like a guitar. It starts to sound like this big amalgamated thing coming at you, and it loses all of its character. And I think that was the magic of Van Halen, is that all of that stuff was about as live as it gets. I mean, the further they went through their careers, but even still, compared to modern standards, it was still incredibly live in the studio, even though there were more overdubs and this and that was going on. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the appeal. And I think that my personal belief is I believe that people would find that refreshing. And they might not be able to explain it like you and I do, but there'd be something about that music that they go, God, there's something, it's cool. It feels alive, you know?
Yeah, I was thinking about. I was telling somebody we were talking about Steve Perry and Arnell, and when I watch Steve Perry and Arnell and contrast their performances, Arnell can sing those notes, and but there's something about the way that Steve Perry emoted the emotion that he came across, how it came across. The way you
Absolutely.
embody a song. This is something that Van Halen did so well too. Is they embodied whatever song it was, whether it was a cover or not. That's what made them these famous covers of theirs. They just were able to take a song and make it their own in a way that really worked.
Exactly. And their personalities came through and everything that they did. It was the complete package. And that's to me what made them great. I mean, on top of, there's shredders all over the place. There's
Sure,
guys that play us under the table with
sure,
relative ease. you know.
sure.
But for the most part, I don't think the average, you don't get the best looking girls coming to your show if you're a shredder. Yeah. You get it. You get it if you're up there putting on a show and having a great time and being entertaining and
Yeah,
fun.
and that's what I thought about Eddie Van Halen. When I first saw him, I think that radiant smile of his, that the way that he came through the TV at you, like with "I'm just having the time of my life," made me
Yeah.
want to play guitar. It was as much that as what he played.
Yeah.
He had that
I agree.
transmission of that emoting of the emotion that he was feeling, and it just captured you. I actually put this in my video that I hadn't finished, but I made a comment about Alan Holdsworth versus Eddie Van Halen, and talking
Yeah.
about how eruption, as technical as it is, still hit the average person in a way that no Alan Holdsworth solo ever will.
Right.
Even though Alan Holdsworth is, Eddie's God, right? There's
Right.
that's something about the way that eruption came across to every person, not just you and I, but a regular people.
Right.
Still on,
Right. It was,
still on the radio.
yeah, it was jaw dropping. And it was because it was delivered with a tone that was unique. You never heard a guitar that sounded like that.
Right.
I mean, that whole first album, that's the other thing. When my buddy first put that album on, we were listening to Double Live Gonzo. That was the guitar sound. You were listening to Joe Perry,
Sure.
the Aerosmith records. And so you heard those Fenders cranked out, or the Marshalls at, the super leads at, on 5, and a little gritty, but then here comes this, Running with the Devil or Eruption or the Ain't Talking About Love. And, and then you get to I'm the One, and it's like, oh my God. I mean, this is just, and it's swinging, it's grooving. It's just the energy, just the whole package was so unusual for its time, so unique.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there were players. I mean, there were technical players back then that, got, Ted Nugent was considered a kind of a guitar god back then,
Hmm. Hmm.
and Eddie destroyed him with that first album. I mean, just put him in the back seat,
Hmm.
and he
Yeah.
knew it. He had Pat Travers, you know,
It was like
um,
it was like when Michael Jordan showed up in basketball. It's just like first time I ever saw Michael Jordan play basketball on TV, I was like, "Oh my lord, this guy just dominates it like it's like there's nobody else on the court. It's just that dominating." And it was the same kind of thing with Van Halen. I think one thing I was going to ask you, since you were there in the '80s, this sound we're talking about the sound of Eddie Van Halen's guitar.
yeah,
You do all these videos about it. To start that discussion, back in '83, as I was getting my first guitar, '82, '83, there wasn't a lot of amplifiers that did this, especially on like a smaller amplifier. But when I was first introduced to the guitar, I ran into an amp that did do it, and that was the '83 Super Champ that Paul Rivera did, right?
yeah.
And I'm a kid, and I plug into this with a black custom Les Paul at the store, and I'm going, that is the sound. That's the sound I want. And it's the Van Halen thing, right? it's his sound, right? All of a sudden, the sound is everywhere, and it becomes this sort of standard that goes on through his entire, life. And then it
Right.
evolves, and that distortion, that higher distortion, you're making that point that they're on like 5 or whatever, and now it's like on 10, right?
Right. Exactly.
And then
And turned down with the Variac, which we didn't know back then, but
right. But then we're chasing that. We're still chasing this tone. But during that period, you know this like I do because we were there. But it was like you got an 800 and it's still not quite there, right? And we had to come up with all the boost pedals, tube screamers, all those different things that we used to try to get there. And that was like the thing we did back in the early 80s to mid 80s, wasn't it? I mean, we were trying to get that sound.
So I got my first 100-watt top. I bought a is it the 2203? Which one is the 100-watter? The Master Volume 100-watt I got. And it wasn't the JCM. It didn't have the gold anodized all the way across. It had the old head case style on it.
I have that. I was 77 like that.
Yeah.
Killer amp.
I got my first one but that was the first one I had was a Master Volume. I didn't know about the magic of the 4-holer yet. I learned that relatively soon after that.
Right.
I started to, and I bought my first 412 cabinet. Then I bought another cabinet, so I had the full stack. I ended up using with mine a micro amp to push it, an MXR micro amp.
I've heard about that.
We used to call it the Hiss Master 5000. So
right. So you're just pushing the front end.
Just pushing the front end of the amp, but as I got more savvy and as I listened more and started me on this tone thing, I got my hands on a 4-hole Marshall, the super lead.
Right.
And I went, holy crap, that's it. That's the sound. I mean, there's a difference between the Master Volume series Marshalls and the 4-hole super lead 100s. The problem is the super lead 100s they'll peel the paint off the wall.
Sure.
So you have to figure out how to tame those. And I got into this very early on building load boxes. I was kind of like, I was bringing this up with on Tone Talk with Dave Friedman, and I don't think anybody got my reference because I'm the old guy, but it was that Monty Python Life of Brian movie where he was with Jesus the whole time, but he was doing everything Jesus was doing, but Jesus was Jesus, and he was just so I kind of felt like I would read something that would come out in like the April 80 Guitar Player magazine, where Eddie's on the cover playing the Bumblebee.
Yeah.
So that was my holy grail, the April 80 issue, because I had my Marshall then. I had 2 Marshalls by then.
Right.
And I was playing actively in a band, and we were trying to figure out how to quiet it down. And I'm reading that article about, he says, there's like a thing the size of a stick of dynamite that goes across the fuse holder. He's got quotes like that in there. And he's also got the famous quote where he cranked the Variac up to 140 volts.
Right.
Well,
right. Wrong.
I did that too. I did that in the studio.
Oh yeah.
And I had the fortune of working in a music store. This was a little bit later. I worked selling retail guitars in the music store while I was gigging on the weekends and that, playing with the band.
Yeah.
And downstairs was a studio, and a 16-track studio. And the service tech at the music store, still around, great guy up in Madison. I asked him to come down. I said, I'm recording some guitar tracks today. So he stood in the room. He had a Variac. I didn't have a Variac, but he had a Variac because he was a service guy.
Sure.
And they used him all the time to slowly bring up tube amps and all that stuff.
Sure.
So he came down and he was familiar with Van Halen, and I said, let's do it. Let's try it. Let's turn it up to 140 volts and let's do it. Let's record this. And he sat in that room with that full stack, that 100-watt top running at 140 volts, every knob on 10. And my tubes were red plating, and he's standing there ready to hit the standby switch, and shut it off. it didn't, I mean, it wouldn't have gone much longer, but I got that 3.5 minute guitar track done and we got it on tape, and I still have that.
Wow.
That song is recorded at 140 volts. So that's a video, or not a video, but an audio I'll post one of these days. But so I was kind of mirroring everything Ed was doing.
Right.
Because I sold that master volume amp almost as soon as I discovered the magic of the 4-hole super lead amp. And by the time I went on the road with a band called The Victims, my guitar rig was a 50 watt super lead with a ohmite 50 watt resistor. It was in the chassis.
Okay.
And I would use that I had effects loops put in, simple effects loops put in the 100 watt super leads.
Okay.
And so if you ran a line out of the preamp, the output section wouldn't work. You'd have to use a Y cable.
Okay.
To connect the preamp to the output of the Marshall. So what I would do is I would take the output of the 50 watt that had the 50 watt ohmite resistor in it, and I would run that into the input of the output section of the super lead, the 100 watt super lead. Okay. So then I could run the 50 watter on full, all knobs on 10, and then I could control the volume going into the 100 watt super lead.
Gotcha.
So that was my touring rig. And then I discovered, you know what, I can put effects in between. So I started doing rack delays and things like that. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. So I was kind of doing the same thing he was doing without really knowing exactly how he was doing it. But so I say that Life of Brian reference, I was kind of doing the same kind of thing coming along. So that's what I've known about all this stuff. You know, people ask me, well, why'd you start doing the videos and everything? And I always say, well, I probably wouldn't have done it had he still been alive. Right. But it was kind of like the first one I did was kind of my tribute to it, because the guy was a genius sort of thing. And it was kind of like, it was cathartic for me.
Sure.
So I kind of knew all this stuff before I did the videos. I've been playing with this kind of rig for my whole life, essentially.
Sure.
So I kind of had it figured out a long time ago.
Well, that's sort of the same thing with this, this whole series of videos. It's something I would have probably ever done had he not passed. But then, there was so much, the Van Halen camp has always been so quiet about everything, know. And a lot of people, like, some of the folks I've had on, I wouldn't say they had a gag order, but they didn't want to talk about it because they didn't want to piss anybody off.
Right.
And now that he's gone, they're not nothing negative. It's all positive. But and I would have been the same way. I would have been like, I would never want to ruin my opportunity to have court with the king if I I was screwed up, right?
And you don't want to give up a guy's trade secrets either. You don't want to give up the, and all the pickup folklore and all the, all of the stuff that goes along with it is, a lot of it's just lore. I mean, it's not really true.
True, right?
The modified amps and all that stuff, it's just not true. So that's one of the things I hope I've shown on these videos, that you can do this. I mean, I can get any one of them. I can get a reissue Plexi to sound the same way. There's no magic about it. It's just moving air and a variac, really, and the right pickup. You got to have the right mix and the right signal chain. But
I'll tell you
it's
what,
amazing.
The first guest I had on here was the rental department manager at Blackbird Studios in Nashville, Mike Simmons.
Mm-hmm.
You know Mike? Yep. So Mike,
I know the name. I have met him.
So Mike and I we kind of found each other through some other folks, and he was at a 78 show, walked into Van Halen, not knowing anything, walked in front row and got blown out of his brain blown out, right? Very first time, Eddie Van Halen, front row, no clue what was about to happen, and Eddie Van Halen, just blew him out of the. And then he was at the show where Ozzy didn't show up, so they played over, and all that.
Yep.
So anyway, Mike and I were talking about how we would. It didn't matter which amp we grabbed. We would always gravitate to that sound. We tried. He goes, I can make any sound like any amp sound like Van Halen as long as I can get in the ballpark. I can get in the ballpark because that's where I go immediately.
Yep. Well, it's so true. Any tube amp, any good clean tube amp,
right,
will get you there. Honestly, it'll get you there. I mean, I got EL34s on my desk. I back and forth between 6 CA7s, EL34s. I actually just had a set of 6L6 GCs in the amp because I'm working on the 1984 video.
Right.
And these get harder and harder for me. I'm working on Diver Down in 1984, and they get harder and harder and harder for me because we're no longer at Sunset Sound. We're at Diver Down's at Amigo.
Right.
84
at Eddie's house.
84 is a 5150 where it's brand new, so you don't even know what's in there yet. Does he have the Pultec EQs? You can see him sitting behind his chair, but what year were those photos taken? Right. He's got him sitting right in that wooden, that 2x4 rack that's got the two Pultecs sitting there. He's got the Eventide sitting next to him, the 910s. Right. So he's got it. But what year are those photos? I don't know. Did it have that when he went to 5150? So I've been struggling with this, and so I've been swapping tubes, and I'm doing my thing. I've probably already made like 100 recordings of different. I'm trying different pickups. I'm trying everything on this because the sound is really different for both of those albums compared to where we left off on Fair Warning.
So we're probably this is at this point at 5150. He's in the middle of maybe retiring Frankenstein from the mix. He's got the 5150 at this point. So we got some sort of Duncan 59 or something in the back, and is that kind of what you're playing around with?
Well, I've had the Duncan. Right now I've got the JB Antiquity in it. However, if you talk to Alan Garber,
yeah. No.
Alan, he's like the foremost historian. He's wrong sometimes, but I'll
we're all wrong sometimes.
I know. I love the guy. I love the guy, but I'll send him and say, Alan, what do you think? He's the one who he swore up and down that the 5150 was basswood, and then they said, it came out recently that and he was all for it, and it's swamp ash. And they did the test here in Nashville when they went to go to license it for EVH. So they finally tested the wood, and the guitar is made out of swamp ash.
Wow.
So I had to go get my Poplar 5150 body and threw that out. Now I've got the swamp ash one. Okay. So I've had the 59 in it. I've got a JB Antiquity in it right now.
Yeah.
And I'm getting pretty close.
I got really hooked on the JB back in the day. I had a JB on my main guitar for a decade, and I just it was just something about that guitar. It was an old Kramer that was like a 3000 Focus, but it had a Chandler neck. It was just a weirdo thing, and it just happened to really work for some reason, and I loved it. And I was on that JB forever. Then I got the replica I made in 06 is the either the Custom 5 or the Custom.
Yep.
And that was really close as far as that tone, or early Van Halen mainly, but yeah.
Yeah, so much of it depends on what you're playing through. If you're doing what I'm doing, where you're playing through a maxed out Super Lead, the 12,000 series maxed out Super Lead 68-ish 69 build, proper filtering, Variac turned down with the real Echoplex. Although I got to say the Chase Tone, if you're familiar with that one, the Chase Tone Echoplex EP3 pedal, I've tried every one of them because I don't like to take the Echoplex out live because it's the rickety old pile of junk,
Right, sure, of course.
and it's on its last leg as it is. It barely wants to run here in the studio. It squeaks and it's
So
clunking around. The pulley falls off the bottom.
what do you think of the Dunlop pedal? What do you think of the Echoplex pedal?
Um, I think the Echoplex, the one that actually has the delay, I think is pretty good. Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
The preamp is, they've got it's the two pedals, so you got to mix them. You got to put them together. But I don't think the preamp is as good as the chase tone. This chase tone is just right now I've got him, and I should probably do a video about it and do the whole Logic video and do the comparison. But chase tone's got to pay me for that.
Right on.
But I've got him in a an effects loop, a bypass loop, so I can turn on the real Echoplex, and I can take it out of the circuit and turn on just the chase tone, take that out of the circuit.
Right.
And man, they're as close as I've heard.
Wow.
It does a good job.
Yeah.
But
always in the front though with Van Halen, right?
Is for the delay, yes. Up until I don't think he's using it on Diver Down or 84. I think the last time it was used was Fair Warning. I think
so
that's
you think,
the last time.
So the delays you hear at the end of Hot for Teacher, the SDE. Is that right?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think it's
PCM? PCM?
It's processed. It's I don't think that's coming from the rig.
Okay.
I think he played the half stack, and then I think that all that other stuff is post.
Okay.
The only thing I think like Drop Dead Legs, where he's got the chorus pedal going, he's got the DC-30, probably the Roland DC-30 that he used on Diver Down. But no, I don't think there's the usual suspects aren't there. The phase shifter's probably in the chain, and the MXR flanger's probably in the chain, but I don't think from the audio tests I've been doing here, the Echoplex doesn't fit in the mix.
Okay.
It doesn't. It adds too much of that low mid bump that's just not there on those records. So there's not a lot of boost in it. I mean, they don't boost, but they enhance. That Echoplex enhances certain frequencies, and it gives you that. It's that low. It's kind of a low mid push to the sound. And like, you can't play if you use the proper pickup for the first album. If you use just a regular standard old PAF, if you don't have the Echoplex, it's way too thin.
Okay.
It's way too thin for that first album. But as soon as you put the Echoplex in there, you go, there it is. Wow. I mean, and the Variac, you get the Variac down to the right level, because the amp thickens up the further you turn down the Variac. It gets warmer and spongier and chewier. So that's a lot of that. I think this whole 90 volt myth is just that. I mean, I think it was Cigar Aficionado, that interview, or somebody said, well, what about the Variac, and how low did you turn it down, really? And he said, I think the lowest I ever turned it down was 60. Think about if everybody raves about the Letterman videos and the tone he gets on the Letterman videos. Do you really think he's got that Variac at 90 volts? The people there's no way in that studio he's running that amp at 60, 65 volts. And that's why it's so fizzy, fuzzy, and dark sounding. And I would love to invite everybody here and show everybody that, and say, just listen to the difference. So the Variac acts it's not only a volume control, but as the amp gets less and less efficient, it becomes a tone control. Like, I've been finding myself as I'm working on 1984, I find myself going back and forth from 64 volts to 68 volts, because I get a little bit brighter at 68 volts than I am at 64. 64 volts sounds good with the V for Hot for Teach, your Drop Dead Legs, Girl Gone Bad. But the other ones that are probably the Frankenstein, Panama and House of Pain, probably the Frank, because back to Alan Garber, he said there's no possible way that it's the 5150, because it wasn't delivered yet. They were made for the tour.
Okay.
I don't know if that's true or not, but I tell you what, in my initial feelings about it, when I've been testing Panama, I've been testing the Panama track and recording that intro over and over. I like the snap of the swamp ash for Panama compared to the ash on the Frank.
Mhm.
There's a noticeable snap that you get. Again, undecided, but still, I'm leaning more towards the 5150. So I'm going to have to take Alan to task on that and say, show me the dates. I want to see receipts.
Right. Well, yeah, that whole period was kind of crazy because that was the whole Kramer thing, and I'm trying to think when he got engaged with all those guys, and I was there. I was in the business at the time, and I was following it really closely at the time, so I kind of remember that whole thing. But he was doing that with that white Beretta and all that, and it was around that time that all that happened. 84, I guess, 85, right? Because I was at the NAMM show in was it 87 that he played with.
Well, before you go there, they built him that Frank replica in 83 because he used that in the South American leg of the 83 tour.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
So he had the Kramer headstock, the banana sock headstock, and the Frank kind of replica body.
Right. The bigger one.
That was right. And then we know he had the beak neck at the US Festival,
right,
on the Frankenstein.
Right.
So he had the Kramer beak neck on, and
83.
And I got to think. Yep. So shortly after that, they had to start recording 84.
Yeah, Garber and I were going. We had a little conversation about a piece of memorabilia that I have he's not sure about. But Greg Renoff's Greg Renoff's a friend of mine, right? And Greg pointed it out to me because he looked at this. I have you've ever seen these canceled checks that have slipped out onto the market?
No, probably not.
Like they're actual canceled checks, right? Okay, out of their bank accounts, right? I don't know how maybe their CPAs just threw them away or kept them, like walked out with them or whatever.
Right.
Anyway, they end up out on the market. So one of the ones I have is to Don Landy for $8,000, and it's dated. And it's 83, and the studio was being put together that year at 5150. And Eddie said he bought that board that he had UA for $6,000. And I know that Don did all the wiring, he did all the work.
Right.
So I don't know whether Don bought it and then Eddie. It's possible that that's something that has to do with 5150.
Right.
The construction of it. I just the only way I'm going to ever find out, and maybe I don't know if Don would ever even know, because he probably wouldn't remember that shit.
Right.
But but Eddie says that in the interview that he paid $6,000 for that board, that UA, and he thought it was a piece of crap.
Yeah.
Don
rewired the whole thing, right?
Right. And it ended up being that. I mean, that board was used on a lot of other things though that was famous. A lot of tracks that were big tracks. It's in Canada now. That board is.
Yeah, I think I saw that. I saw that poster going out. Somebody bought it. Yeah.
Yeah, they're using it, and it has quite a history behind it. Before it was in his studio, it was at I think at one of the other big studios in LA, and recorded a lot of big songs.
And I'm assuming. Well, I know they had to record 84 on that board.
Oh yeah,
they had to.
Yeah. It was.
5150 might have even been recorded on that board. I don't know when the SSL got there.
Yeah, it was later for sure.
Yeah. So I mean and it's so trying to figure all that stuff out and trying to figure out. All right, so they start recording in what, August of 83, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they wrap it probably, I don't know, November maybe of 83. Then they shoot the videos for Jump Panama. So Jump has got the Frankenstein with the Kramer beak neck on it, and then Panama's got the 5150, or what would become the 5150, right?
Right.
And Hot for Teacher's got the slanted pickup guitar, whatever. Is that the 84 guitar, or is that the Hot for Teacher?
Hot for Teacher guitar, they call it. Yeah, they call it.
Yeah. So
yeah, that check. Let me look at this check and tell you what the date is on it, because it's right here on my wall over here. I'll tell you. It is 9/1/83, September 1st of 83.
that's right around the right time.
I know.
I mean,
Right.
that's right.
Right in there, right?
Yeah.
You could have got the board a month or two earlier, and they did the install, and it could have been. But yeah, it's that whole year, knowing what's going on with you, like you said, with the recordings themselves and all the transition. Because
what's that?
Well, they were working on that album around the US Festival the year before, though, right? They started. Didn't they say they were working on it?
He was probably writing. He was probably writing, and I think he was messing. He started messing with the Oberheim, the OB, the OBX or OBXA or whatever.
Yeah.
So he started messing with that keyboard, but I don't think they were actively recording. They were probably. He was just in the writing stages. I think the recording started because when did they get back from that South American leg of that tour? It was
right.
And that was pretty much the end of it, because then Roth went to go vacation, and then they did the US Festival, right? Isn't that the?
I think so. Yeah, because he was on vacation, had to get him to come back, right?
Yeah, he stayed in South America or did whatever he did on safari in South America in the Amazon or what. And then so they bring him back to do the US Festival, and at some point they got to start recording. Or wait a minute, is that the right?
That sounds right.
That's the right sequence, right? US Festival was 83, right?
Yeah, it's like early. I
think so.
In spring, right, of 83.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they had to record. They had to start recording that album sometime in the mid to late summer into the fall of 83.
Yeah. Because by the time they hit January, they're in my hometown with the album. Yeah.
Yeah, really. I mean, it was officially released right around that time, wasn't it?
Right around the first few weeks of January of '84.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they debuted the Jump video on New Year's Eve '84, right, on MTV.
You're right. I remember hearing that. When that first came out on the radio and Jump came out, it was quite different. The first time the keyboards were prominently featured.
Yeah.
And people talk about how that was kind of I don't know. People talk about Tattoo in that and how that was sort of like a parallel, like, whoa, wait a minute, what's this? I don't know about this song. There was people that didn't like Jump. That turned out to be their biggest song ever. But people were like, what the hell?
I know.
They're like, what the hell is this?
You got to like it all. I really do. I like it all for what it is. And I've got my favorites and, the stuff I listen to and the stuff when I sit down with a guitar, probably play more often.
Mm-hmm.
You always have your go-to, your favorites and all that stuff. But, the whole catalog is really great. What a band.
Right.
I don't care what the lineup, even with, Van Halen 3.
Sharon, yeah.
Gary,
Mm-hmm.
even that, was probably a dark time for Ed and everything that was going on, but there's still just some great stuff on that album.
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
I revisited that album. I talked to Brad Talinsky and Chris Gill, interviewed them, and they were talking about, Chris was like, just go back and listen to the music and try to, kind of listen to this album. And I did, I listened back and I kind of I thought about Mike Post being the producer on that record. And then I started thinking, man, these songs would be fantastic on a soundtrack, or if they were going to do some sort of post documentary on Eddie. Some of those pieces are great for that.
Yeah, perfect. They really are. They really are.
Some really neat stuff on that. Let me ask you about the Van Halen 1 guitar, since you're the tone guy, and I just built one. I'm pretty sure everything is accurate. Swamp Ash. Now, I've never owned. I have a Swamp Ash Yamaha Pacifica, but it's that half thickness body that they put out in the early '90s.
Right.
That wasn't a very heavy guitar, but this sucker is heavy, like Les Paul heavy.
Northern Ash. You said Swamp Ash, but you're talking Northern Ash, right?
Northern Ash, yeah.
Northern Ash, yeah.
Yeah, it's heavy.
Yep.
So what do you?
Mine's not as heavy as a Les Paul.
Really? Okay.
but it's certainly heavier than my swamp ash. This one's swamp ash. This one's the northern ash. This
Right,
one's
right.
definitely heavier,
Yeah.
considerably heavier.
Yeah. Okay, so I think the Yamaha I have is swamp ash. It's not northern.
Yeah, probably. Swamp ash is definitely lighter.
Yeah. Yeah, my swamp ash, it's a Pacifica from the 90s. So, this whole process of doing these guitars and all this, people have been doing this for years and years and years. And getting all the nuances. That one has the newer Frankenstein pickup on it. Have you used that?
Yeah, it's I haven't warmed up to that one. I'm still not convinced that that's the pickup.
Okay.
I know it's not the pickup. It is absolutely not it's not the correct pickup for the first album.
Okay.
It's a PAF. It truly is just a stock PAF out of his 61 335.
Okay.
I actually had mine custom wound by Jalen. I do a lot of stuff with Greg at Jalen.
Yeah, right.
I said, I sent him a spec, an offset coil spec where the slug coil is wound hotter than the screw coil. And it's got a short rough cast A5 in it.
Right, that's what.
And I run a 250K pot on the theory that that wiring harness came out of the Stratocaster. I know the guys like this. There's the current theory, I've seen some of these guys on some of these, podcast, webcast things. They say, "Oh no, the pots came out of the 335," and I think, probably not, because why would the 5-way switch still be in the, and he had the tone pot on the early iteration of the Frankenstein too. He had the tone pot sticking out of the pick guard.
Right.
The 5-way and everything was tucked underneath in the shit, and all he did was wire that pickup to that volume pot.
Right.
That's my theory. So that's why 250K pot. So with the brighter PAF and the 250K pot, because if you don't run a tone control like a Les Paul circuit, the guitar is way too bright. The guitar going straight to the output jack is way too bright.
Okay.
Or way too distorted. That's why the Bumblebee had a tone pot in it. There's a rumor, or people are now saying the 5150 had a tone control buried under the control cavity. I think the myth of the volume pot wired directly to the output jack is just that. It's a myth, because it does weird things to your amplifier. It's too much. The pickup doesn't get loaded down enough, and you get this really shrill, too much gain kind of sound. So either you combat that with if you're going to use a 500K pot, you put a 500K tone pot in there too, and wire it in the way you normally would in a Les Paul or a Strat, however, or just bypass that and use a 250K pot, because that will give you the same balance that would have been a 500K volume and a 500K tone in a Les Paul. So the 250 gets you there, and it loads the pickup properly, and you don't get that more shrill, spanky kind of, it warms it up. That's why when you use the EVH, the Frankenstein pickup, you almost have to go to a 500K because the pickup is too dark. It's too dark with a 250K. So then you're back on the 500K.
Yeah, that's a 500K in there that I put in.
Yeah, so there's little nuances like that. So if you're trying to be period correct, you put, like I had Greg wind this one for me. It's a 7.85K offset, asymmetric coil. Like I said, heavier, more winds on the slug coil than on the, I could tell you the percentage of offset. I forget. I think it's like a 6% offset. Rough cast A5. And the reason I think it's a short A5 is if you zoom in on the Frankenstein pickup on the box, if you find that picture on the internet, and you find a nice color picture of it, and you zoom way in, look at the high E side of the pickup. You don't see any magnet sticking out. On an A2, a long A2 or a long A5, you would see the magnet. All you see is base plate. it's a short A5 that's in there, and that would have been the original pickup in the 61 335. More than likely a short A5. So that's my reasoning, and that's kind of when I start to go down the Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole here.
Sure, right.
That's where I kind of started. So I've tried the short A5 in the EVH Frank pickup a number of times. It gets me closer, definitely gets me closer. But I think there's something else going on there with Ed's pickup. I think it's kind of bogus that for each guitar, they have this story when they were trying to recreate it that one of the coils didn't have a reading. They used that story for both the Frankenstein and the 5150. You think that's really true? I just think they're trying not to tell you what the real pickup is.
Right. That makes sense.
If you look at the early JB, the prototype, and I kind of covered this in the fair warning video that
you did. Yeah, I remember that.
They're asymmetric coils. That wind was an asymmetric coil, and you can find them. They're right around 13.6 to 14.5 K. And I used to have one. It's sitting in my pickup junk box. I did have a coil open up on it, and I've never had it rewound. One of these days I will. But I played that thing for years. And I didn't know if it was a JB or not. It's just it was the guitar or a pickup that was rewound. It came out of a celebrity-owned guitar. I got it from my buddy at the music store way back in 1980, and I put it in one of my Super Strats that I had built back then.
Mm-hmm.
But the coils are asymmetric. The original JBs were the very original, the prototype JBs. The screw coil and the slug coil were about 1,000 K off. And they were often wound with whatever pickup they were rewinding, the magnet would stay in. So to me, that makes complete sense. If Seymour actually rewound Ed's original PAF, that 61, which isn't really a PAF, it would have had a patent sticker on it, but it's in 61, it would have had a patent sticker. Of course, it's the wrong patent number. Do you know that story too?
No, I don't know that story.
The actual, to this day, the patent number on a Gibson pickup is for the trapeze tailpiece. The patent is, if you look up the patent office, it's the trapeze tailpiece on like a Birdland.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a pickup. So the patent that's on the pickup is not, it's the wrong patent number, but that's a trivia question.
Okay.
But anyway, so if Seymour rewound that 61 PAF for Ed out of the 335, he probably did that prototype JB wind that he was doing around 78, 79. I think when the EQs went away on the live rig, when the floor EQs, when the Boss EQ went away, when they came back from the Japan tour, he no longer had to boost it because he had a pickup that actually had some output compared to that PAF. It had some meat. It was thicker sounding. So that's when I think it happened. And you see the EQ gets lost out of the rig, and he's got enough drive coming out of the guitar. So That's my theory on it. And that's what I based that fair warning pickup on, the wind we did for fair warning. So it's an early JB type prototype. And I think I would fine tune that pickup a little bit. I think my coil offset is a little too much on that one. And I think I've got a little too much overall wind on it. It's a little too much DC resistance. Mm-hmm. So, but those are just fine tuning tweaks. But that's the problem I find with the EVH Frank pickup. It's got the Gaustad A2, which I think they're trying to mimic the less magnetic or magnetic field of the short A5. That's why the A2 is degaused slightly. But the coils are symmetric coils, and so you get great harmonic response, great tapping, and great side pick harmonic and all that stuff. They just jump off of that pickup, and they're great for that. When you start unbalancing the coils, the guitar gets a little bit brighter, and you lose some of that blanket over the speaker cabinet feel that EVH Frankenstein pickup has. And so the unbalanced coils get you closer to where I think Ed was with that unbalanced. What they did on the 5150, if you listen to Seymour Duncan, he said Ed went with the JB, but who the hell knows? And the JBs The JBs were different then than the production JBs now. That's why I go with the antiquity JBs, because they're closest to what those original super early 80s JBs were.
I was gonna say that JB I have in that old Kramer, it sounds different than the one I bought a few years ago. I bought something new, stuffed it in a
Absolutely.
and it's nothing like it to me.
No, they're completely different. So that, you know, anybody listening to this, don't fall for the JB thing, because it's not. You have to either get the antiquity or find yourself a JBJ from, you know, 81 or 82. No later than that, because they start to change.
Yeah. So
they claim they didn't, but they do.
So the Seymour Duncan 78 that's been out there forever. You know, what do you think of that thing? Have you heard or know used it?
I own a bunch of them. I've got a big like a steamer trunk full of pickups. I mean, I have cycled every pickup known to man. I think I've got currently about 4 or 5 78s, you know, and I've tried short A5s, I've tried A5s, I've tried, you know, back to the A2s. I think it's a great pickup, and I think it's if you're looking for an all-around average pickup of what Ed was using, I think that probably gets you closest to all the eras. You can play all the eras. Like if you're a working guy like yourself and you're out playing and you're playing through a similar rig, a Marshall rig or whatever, and you want that tone to span the first 6 albums, the 78 probably gets you closest to that. I think that the 78, you know, Seymour rewound a lot more pickups than just that original. That are the original PAF.
Yeah.
I think the one that's my wife just walked in. I think the one that the melted one that you see, the really super melted one.
Yeah.
That you see on the Frankenstein, probably at the beginning of the 79 tour.
When he
doesn't have the Floyd.
The one he talks about putting in the wax and nearly melting the whole thing.
Yeah, I think that's a DiMarzio. I think that's a DiMarzio PAF, and I think that the 78 is a good recreation of that. I think Seymour might have wound that DiMarzio to like 9K. And that pickup was not in that guitar for very long.
Okay.
Because then after he did it might have been in the Frank until the Floyd Rose came. Until he put the Floyd in, then he wanted something that was beefier and heavier sounding.
Right.
But you can get great Van Halen 2 tones with the 78. I think it sounds great. It's too dark for Van Halen 1 if you're trying to be super hypercritical.
Right.
It doesn't have quite enough bite, but if you're going for that, like I said, that all around Van Halen tone, I think the Jalen Origin, which is the same, I think the Pasadena White, the Pariah, is the same deal. It's all that 9K A2 kind of wind. So great pickups. I mean, I love the burst buckers too. I think the Gibson burst buckers.
Yeah, burst buckers.
I find the 57 classics to be a little tubby on the bottom end. They have a little bit too much bottom, and that's I find that with a lot of the modern types of pickups. You know, and honestly, you can't really fight the 59 either, the Duncan 59. I mean, that's a great all around. It gets you there. I mean, it puts you right there in the ballpark for sure.
Right, man. Tell you what, the production stuff you do too, you know, when you recreate all the studio magic, you know, the compression, the EQ, and all that stuff. That's something that I've always said that people don't pay attention to too much with the Van Halen sound, but it's a lot in that reverb, and it's a lot in that, because when we talked about the room mics earlier today, you know, when we were talking earlier, you're hearing the raw sound in the room, but then you get to see the contrast of the two, with and without that part of it, and it's a big factor.
It's a huge factor, and you have to take that into consideration. and it's the first mistake most guitar players make too. Young guitar players are guys that, they're trying to get this killer sound that comes out of their speaker cabinet, this killer guitar sound that's, big and full and just huge in the room. You stick an SM57 in front of that and you try to record it, you press record, and it's like, my God, that sounds like shit. You're rolling off, you're shelving all the bass off, you're shelving this off, you got too much gain, there's no clarity in so a lot of what you hear, everybody thinks that there's or a lot of people think that there's a gain pedal, the amp is boosted, like on Van Halen 1. They're hearing all this distortion. When you really listen closely, it's pretty damn clean, especially by today's standards.
Sure. Yeah, right.
And you're hearing compression pull that sound together. So they're compressing it just right. So that's squeezing the dynamic range, and it's pulling that, it's making that distortion smoother. So you're hearing that, and then you're throwing that sound into the reverb, and then they're EQing the reverb. That's the other thing. Don't just, like, if you've got the Sunset Sound reverb plugin, don't just settle for running it into a channel on your DAW or however you're using it. Compress the reverb, and EQ the reverb.
Right. Because
there's stories about Don Landis up in the what is going on right now? My dog's freaking out. Where he was moving blankets around, changing the dampening of the chamber.
Yeah.
So changing the tone of it. Plus, they're bringing it back on a send on the board. They're going to EQ that reverb. They don't. If you listen closely to that reverb, it doesn't have a lot of high end in it.
Right.
So it's hard to. It's not just that reverb. That reverb plugin is fantastic. It's great, but there's so much more that's going on. Like a friend of mine, who's an engineer type and has a lot of experience in the old analog studios and everything. He talks about the Don Landy, the theory that they have is that he tried to get a great mono mix in the room with the room mic, with like a Neumann U87 or something like that. And it's set up, and you can see it in that one picture from Van Halen 1. You can see it up against the wall right in front of the band.
Mm-hmm.
No further than 15 feet away from the drum kit.
Right.
And he has a theory, my buddy has a theory that that's where Landy started with. He wanted a great mono mix with the band. The stereo imaging came from the overhead mics on the drum kit.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's bleeding into everything else. They're using gobos and everything to do as much separation as possible.
Sure.
But they're creating an artificial stereo spectrum around, that's why the guitar is panned hard left, but the reverb is left and right.
Right.
The other myth that the thing that people think is the reverb is right, the guitar is left. No, the reverb is going straight up the center. The guitar is left.
Right.
So you've got reverb on the left side, and you've got only reverb in the right side for the guitar. But there's a little bit of that U87 from the room blended into the full mix. So you have to think in that way when you're. I gotta pick up my dog. Here's my boy. Here he is. So when you're trying to recreate that studio magic, you kind of got to think that way, and you got to think about there's no gating, everything is wide open, the mics are bleeding into every other mic. Like I was doing an experiment in here for the longest time. I was talking to Mike Himmel.
Mm-hmm.
We all know Mike Himmel, another monster guitar player.
Right.
And Mike and I were theorizing that, a lot of that sound is not only the room mic, because what you'll find is if you do the amp the right way and you've got the right pickup in the guitar, it's pretty bright in the room. And Michael Anthony had that quote too. He says, the guitar wasn't all that. And when you walked in the room, he said, it was pretty bright. So you always got to keep that in the back of your mind, so that in Marshall Super Leads are bright amps, and PAF pickup into a Marshall Super Lead wound up is going to be pretty damn bright. So we tried this. Mike Himmel and I were talking about this. So I mic'd up the drum kit in here in this studio, mm-hmm. and I set it up So I had a good drum sound. So I've got like 12 mics, 12 or 13 mics on this kit in here.
Mhm.
Overheads, room mic, and then each thing is mic'd individually, separately. No gates, none of that stuff.
Mhm.
And when I would record the parts for one of these videos, I ended up, it became too complex, but this was the theory and it sounded great. So when I pressed record to record the video shots that I do, I was actually, all the drum mics were live. So I was picking up the guitar in all of those drum mics that are EQ'd for the drums.
Okay. Awesome.
And at the volume levels for the drums. And what you start to get is that super full big guitar sound coming through. So
Right.
that's a lot of what happens on Van Halen 1. You've got all those live open mics in that room. Yeah, there's gobos set up between the bass rig and the guitar rig, and they've got it, tried to wall it off from the drum kit a little bit. But I mean, as well as I, even if he's got that variac down to 75, 80 volts or something, whatever they're running it at, that amp is still pretty loud in there.
Oh yeah.
You listen to that room mic that Brian Kehoe played on the Sunset Sound video series, where it's just eruption from the room mics.
Mm-hmm.
That bass guitar is louder than hell in that room. I mean, when he hits that, they hit the open A, he's cranking that SVT in there. So that's the dominant noise in that room. So all of that gets bled through, and they had a mic on that bass too. There were no DIs or anything. They stuck a mic in front of that thing.
Sure.
So
yeah, it is.
So
it is the bleed you're talking about. The entire picture is made up of all the different little parts. I think that's something that a young recording person, or a person coming up in the recording industry behind a board, and they're starting to start out, they don't realize how much of the sound is from the entire picture, not from one thing.
Well, and that's the advice I would give. If you're trying to make good cohesive sounding recordings, you are one loud little dog. He's licking his paws now, and it sounds like you're ingesting something. But anyway, what modern recording has allowed people to do is you can put a plug-in on it. You can have a different reverb for every the snare drum's got a plate, and the drum kit's got a nice little room reverb or a tight little room reverb. So you've got multiple reverbs. The vocals got this reverb, the guitar has a different reverb. Take one reverb and run the whole band through it like you do live. And you take your effects end and you adjust the amount that you want on that particular instrument. I mean, that immediately glues your recording together in a more old-fashioned way. And gating and all this nonsense, you hear these. I mean, I don't care for them. I know the metal guitar sound is so tight,
Mm-hmm.
and they're doing all that, all that stuff, and it's so tight and it's so thick and it's so gated. I mean, for God's sakes, move the mic away from the speaker a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And don't slam the gate shut, and let's hear that guitar and that amp breathe a little bit.
Right,
I know that's the style, but they do the same thing for drum kits. Drums are so dry and
lifeless.
They just don't. They don't. Ian Pace talked about it too at Deep Purple. He talks about using the proper cymbal size in the studio. For live, you want big cymbals, because you're filling a big room. In the studio, you put your small cymbals on. You use 14-inch crash cymbals,
right? Thin crashes. They have a decay that's a little shorter, and it's not so overbearing.
Yeah, so I hate this. Everybody tracks now. We touched on that earlier. Everybody tracks on the grid, and they come back, and the guitar players come back and then play their parts. They're not playing along with the drummer, And if they are, unfortunately, sometimes or most of the time, the drummer's on a click, and it just sucks the life out of it. And the engineering, the way you record it, sucks the life out of it too. It becomes way generic. If you play with the actual room ambience and you try to use, pretend you don't have 30 compressors to choose from. You've got 3 compressors in the entire room that you can use. So use them judiciously, bus compression, things like that. So if you're trying to embark on this and recreating these band, like I do with the Van Halen tones, you have to think old school. And fortunately for me, I recorded an old 24 track and 16 track studios with real tape. I have that experience and did quite a bit of that. So
you understand.
I learned what it was like.
Yeah, I understand how the band in the room makes a difference, and it's like even with the live recordings that we do with the band, you're fighting with a combination of the room itself and the room. You on one hand you're fighting with a lot of bleed, but you got to leave some of that, otherwise it sounds dead. And so it's a balance between all of that to get that to sound. Sometimes, like I'll do if something doesn't sound, when I'm trying to recreate what it sounded like in the room, because that's when I'm trying to get that across the internet, I want to recreate what it sounded like in the room to the person in that room. So I'll put a little bit of reverb on the master just to give it that space that we hear naturally in the room.
Right.
Just subtle, a little bit in the but again, kind of gluing the whole mix together with this one reverb that gives it a space, gives you that same
a little bit. Right, a little bit of compression, a little bit of reverb, glue it all together, a little bit of air. Take a master EQ and maybe just add a touch of air. Get rid of some of the thump on the low end. Some of that boomy
clean it up a little
crap.
Bit.
Yeah.
That room, that room you saw me in, they had a lot of it's a lot of ambience in that room, especially if they're not full. And when I was mixing those mixes, I was all that ambience, even in our ears. We had to cut the reverb way back in our ears because there's so much ambience around us naturally that we had to pull back the reverb in the ears because it's not dead. But yeah, you still want to recreate that sound though when you're putting it back out there for people to watch.
Yeah, and that's for me too. Like when I play live, when I take the Marshall rig out live, I don't have a reverb unit in the rack. I don't use reverb. If I'm doing the wet dry wet thing, I'll do the SDE 3000s. I do that rig if we're doing the Van Halen thing.
Right.
But if I'm doing the early Van Halen thing, it's a echo in the front of the amp like he did. Mm-hmm. When you're in a big room, there's natural ambience all over. You don't need reverb, period. If the front of house guy wants to throw a little reverb on the vocal to help out the vocalist, great. And we're playing so damn loud on stage that we'll get a little reverb on the instruments because it's going to bleed through the vocal mic. I mean, that's our philosophy.
Sure.
When we do that.
For sure. Well, man, I appreciate you being. I don't want to keep you all day, but thanks for talking about all things Van Halen with me and give me your impressions on those early days when you saw him live and the day that he passed. I mean, tell me a little bit about how you felt about Eddie Van Halen as a person, as an innovator, to close it out, and anything else that you would want to talk about.
Well, I mean, obviously devastated. We all knew he was in bad health, I guess, or off and on bad health, but he had seemed like he had gotten gotten it together and was really enjoying life. It seemed like the last few years,
for sure.
And it was personally devastating to me. I'm not sure. I probably teared up a little bit. I didn't bawl or anything, but I probably teared up a little bit. And it's like there's a hole in the universe. There's a hole in, for us and for so many, it's not just we guitar geeks. I mean, he transcended that. He transcended that. It was just the joy, the love of music, and that he exuded and put forth. I got more condolences sent to me, people texting me, people calling me. My brother called me immediately, and he was devastated too. I mean, we grew up playing his stuff, and it was emotional, and it continues to be. I mean, it's hard to imagine a world, a musical world. I don't think he was any great intellect or any great philosopher or any great, but here was a guy that grabbed the world by the ass, did what he wanted to do, did what he was great at. He invented the whole damn thing, essentially, created his world, lived by his own rules, and did it better than anybody. I mean, I think he won. I think he won the game. I mean, that's what we all dream about. Everybody in life dreams about that. And if you just got to love somebody's tenacity and their grit and and love of what they do, and a never say die attitude. I mean, there's a lot to really, there goes my dog again. I'm giving the eulogy and my dog is too. but anyway, go on and on. But that's the general thing to me. Devastating loss to, I hate to go beyond too epic, but it's a devastating loss to humanity. It's a devastating loss to especially the music world. And you see those memes floating around the internet, complain all you want and bitch, piss, and moan, but just be glad you were alive in the era that Eddie Van Halen was alive in. I mean, that's very true. Right.
Right.
We haven't seen greatness like that on that level. So
yeah, hopefully we'll one day. Maybe one day we'll again. We're hoping for that.
Yep. Absolutely.
Well,
for sure.
At least we know what it is we'll know what it is when it comes. Right.
You got to slap me out of my wheelchair, probably. Yeah, absolutely.
Right on, man. Well, thanks for hanging out, man, all day. And next time you're down, let me know. Hit me up.
I will.
Let me know you're coming.
Definitely. I definitely will. And thanks for having me. I appreciate it. A lot of fun.
Buddy. Let me know if you need anything. And we're not that far away from each other, so.
Yep, absolutely. Come up here and visit me one of these days.
You know what? Because of COVID, I just hadn't been to Nashville in so long. But I was up not long ago for the first time in a long time to see Journey when they came. I think it was Journey. No. I went to see them in Atlanta, but that was my first real concert again. Journey and Toto. And
that's cool.
Yeah, it was great. And everything's getting back to normal, where you can come up and hang out. I used to do it all the time. I used to come up and hang out, and I had some friends over at Blackbird besides Mike, and just pop around town, see people, see lots of guitars.
Yeah, if you get the inkling, come on up, hang out at the studio. I'll show you the super leads, let you move some air in here. And
sounds good to me, man.
And have some real fun.
That's what we do, bro.
And then we'll honky. Then we'll go honky tonk, and I'll get humbled by the guitar players playing there.
That's right. So, sounds good, man. Thank you, Jim, for being with me.
All right.
Thanks, buddy. You have a good night, man. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
See you later, buddy.
Later.
Bye-bye.
All right, bud.